So I want to talk a little bit more about the channel box and the attribute editor here. These are the places where we'll find ourselves going to 90% of the time when we create our object. Okay, so let's create a sphere now. And in the point of creation, you notice how easy it is. I just click and the object appears on the scene. Okay, so there are two ways to create an object, either by clicking here on the shelf, either for polygons or for curves. So the other way is to come under the menu and click create, and we see the NURBS, that is the curves, and the polygons, which is what we're using now, the orange colored ones. Now there are some other tricks that are here. If you come into the object, you see down at the bottom here we have something called interactive creation, and we have exit on completion. So exit on completion means when I create an object interactively, immediately it's created, I exit the creation. So if I toggle off, let me toggle off the exit, sorry about this, exit on completion, then come back, toggle on interactive creation. Now if I click on the sphere, it doesn't appear. Okay, so it gave a command that I should drag along the grid. So once I drag along the grid, I don't necessarily, with this tool or with this technique, I don't necessarily have to create the object from the point of origin. I can create it anywhere on the grid. So I can come here and drag and it creates a sphere. Once I'm done with that, it exits. We can see that the sphere is created based on wherever I drag it. It doesn't create it necessarily because of the center point. If it's a cube I'm trying to create, so you see drag the base on the grid, then pull up for height. So I drag for the base of the grid. Okay, then once I leave, I drag once again for the height. All right, good. So now you can see it's still in the creation mode. That means if I drag again, I'll be creating another cube, just like it was with the sphere. And that's because I had the exit on completion unchecked. If I check the exit on completion now and go and create a sphere, once I'm done, it exits that tool. So now it goes into my translation tool. So most times I actually like to be in the exit on completion so that I don't mistakenly drag another object instead of manipulating the first one. Okay, so this interactive way of drawing our tools is very handy sometimes. If you want to draw a large object, you don't have to scale it. So whatever you draw, that's going to be its size or a scale. Okay, if you come and scale like this one, if I come and scale it up again to be big, then you can see the scale now increases. But with the interactive creation, all I do is I just drag, and no matter how big I drag it, its scale is always going to be 1. Okay, so that's the difference between the two of them. So all right, so for now I'll just turn off my, or let me just leave it on, doesn't matter. So I want to talk about the channel box. So I come back in here. All right, so I have the translate, and I can zero out the points just by dragging left with my left mouse all over them, then turn them all to 0 so that it's lined up. Now if I want to move this object without having to move with this, guys, I can as well click on the translate X here, then come into my scene and middle mouse and drag, and it will move on that axis. Okay, the same thing with rotation. Now to rotate it, middle mouse and drag, and it rotates the axis. So the channel box, like I said, is a kind of summary that shows us the tools of our object. We have the translate, rotate, scale, and visibility. Then we have the input. If I want to figure out what was used to, how maybe to manipulate the points of this cube, I can click here where we have inputs. So I'll click on the polysphere, for instance. Then I see I have my radius of 1, which is the normal scale. Then subdivision axis 20, subdivision height 20. The axis and the height are these lines that run across the sphere. So if I want to change my subdivision axis to something like, I click here now and I middle mouse here, I can reduce my subdivision axis, and you see the way the shape of the sphere is changing to something that looks like a Chinese lamp, you know. So that's the axis. The more the axis, the smoother the object gets. The less the subdiv on the axis, the rougher it gets. So if I just take it back to 20, if I do that for the heights, you won't see that much of change like the Chinese sphere, but rather you see changes on this other vertical axis. So that's the height, subdivision height is affecting cut. So when we're talking about height, you're talking about horizontal cuts. We're talking about the width or the axis, you're talking about vertical cuts. So anytime you see height, what you're doing is you are cutting up lines across horizontally. So you can see changing of the axis and the height, the subdivisions or the lines. These lines are what we call subdivisions. So greatly affects the shape of the object. Okay, so this is a summarized version. Like, see, we don't have a slide here. Then in the channel box also we have a layer option where we can put objects in layers so that we can group them together and do certain things to them. So we'll talk about layers shortly. So that's the channel box, and it helps us observe the tools or the components of our object, what is involved in their creation. If I create like a knob sphere, for instance, a knob sphere has a different object selection. Here we have radius just like this, but now we have a start sweep and an end sweep because these objects are built differently from these ones. You can see the subdiv for this guy is kind of different. It's not called subdivision, it's called like sections. So we have 8 sections and 4 spans. So 4 spans are kind of the vertical divisions. So there's a 4 horizontal divisions. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4 spans. Then we have 8 sections, which is this guy. So changing my subdiv here doesn't actually make this guy like a Chinese lamp, unlike this one. So we'll talk about this more in our modeling section. Just wanted to show you that the channel box shows them different tools to be used for them. Okay, then the attributes editor, we can get it from here, clicking in the middle, or Control A will bring it up. So, and this is the attribute editor. The attribute editor shows us a whole lot more. First of all, the channel box, you see, if we do anything on the sphere, you will see it's trying to create histories here. So on the attribute editor, we have everything in different tabs. So the first tab here, P-sphere, talks about this point of the channel box. You can see there, P-sphere. So it talks about everything has to do with its position in the scene, this position of the sphere. Well, if I click on this one, so we see the knob sphere, and we see everything has to do with the position of it. So P meaning polygon, and NURBS, meaning NURBS. So this is P sphere, polygon sphere. All right, so we have everything has to be translation, rotation, scale, just like we had, but we now have more options that are more like I said, this guy is like a summarized version of this. We don't have shear here, but we do have shear here. Okay, we have the rotate order, we have transform, offsets, parent matrix, we have pivots, things that do with pivots. So we have limit information. So this limit information usually works like I don't want it to rotate or move into a particular kind of to a particular axis. So let's say in translate now, I can limit its translation on the x from, I can say, okay, don't go beyond 1 and don't go beyond 2. So right now current limit is 0 and there's no limit, so I can say limit -1 and maximum 1. So now the limit of the movement of this object, oh, this is z-axis, sorry about that. So translate limit on the x-axis. Now on the z-axis, you can see I can move as far as possible. Same thing with the y-axis. Okay, on the x-axis, you can see I can move beyond 1 frame, neither can I move back on 1 frame. So these limits I actually use when we're dealing with modeling, rigging, and animation. So but I just want to show you how we can actually stop the movement of an object. So turning off the limits on the max is going to make I can move on the max, but I can't move on the minimum. That I can't go to the negative x, but I can move to the positive x in any direction. This will come in handy sometime in our training. Okay, so apart from that, we also have broken down P-sphere shape, things that have to do with the way the shape is created, like tessellation attributes. Tessellation, these little boxes here, and some other stuff. We won't really use this as much, but we use it in modeling. Okay, then we have the major aspect here. This place where we had to click on Polysphere, that we had these 3 objects. Here we come here, Polysphere. That means things that now work on the way the object is divided. So here we have a slide which is easier for us than clicking on middle mouse clicking on the scene. So I can come here and just change the slide, and it will change the shape on the object. So using the slide is kind of easier for us. So like I said, the attribute editor shows a whole lot more than channel box, even the shading of the objects, initial shading. Now we'll get into shading when we talk about the materials. So first of all, the rule of point, don't change this color yet. Don't change this. This is the initial shading group. If you change this color, every object you create here will attain that new color you assigned here. So please don't change this. When we want to assign a material to an object, there's a way we will do it, and it's not from here right now. This is the initial shading group, so don't change it, because if you change it, any object you create next will appear in that color. So let's take, for instance, if I come here and say let's change this guy to yellow, you see every object now becomes yellow. If I create a new object, if I create a cube, for instance, you see the cube now becomes yellow. So everything is now yellow. So don't change this one just yet. Okay, we will have to add a new color group to it. Okay, so just hit Z to come back to that. All right, so the attribute editor shows not just things that have to do with translation and stuff, but also things have to do with shading, and there's something that we'll be using a whole lot throughout our model, because that is how we're going to effect changes to our object. So let's go into the next video.